Holy ground at Hebron. The theology of place and sacred grief. Genesis chapter 23, verse 2. We return to the living word. In our first session we stood at the threshold of Genesis 23 and received the theology of Sarah's sacred years, every stage held and counted by the God who embedded her existence in His own divine name. Today we press into verse 2, and the word opens into an even more personal and more tender territory. We are going to enter the geography of Sarah's death, the full anatomy of Abraham's grief, and one of the most remarkable scribal anomalies in the entire Torah, one maintained through 3,000 years of careful hand copying precisely because it carries a healing word for every person who has ever had to weep in secret. Settle in. What is here for you today is very specific and very personal. Kiryat Arba and Hebron. The double name of a sacred place. And Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, that is, Hebron, in the land of Canaan. The text holds two names for the same geographical location simultaneously without resolving them into one simpler designation, and this is not a scribal accident preserved through careless transmission. In the ancient Semitic world, names are not labels attached to things for the convenience of reference. They are declarations of essence, proclamations of where the thing truly is at its deepest, most fundamental level of reality. When the Torah holds two names for the same place without resolving the tension between them, it is announcing that this location exists in two realities at once, the visible historical reality of a Bronze Age city in the Judean hill country, and the invisible eschatological reality of a place designed by God for a destiny greater than any contemporary observer could perceive. Kiryat Arba means the city of four. The Talmud in Tractate Eruvin preserves the ancient tradition that the city received this name because it was destined to hold four great covenant couples in the cave of Machpelah: Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah. The city of the four covenant pairs. If this tradition carries the weight that serious scholars believe it does, then Sarah is not arriving at a random geographical location when she dies. She is arriving at a place prepared for her before the world understood what preparation meant. Her name was already inscribed in the geography of the promise before her body was laid in the ground. God had already designed her address. Her death was not a disruption of the divine plan. It was the fulfillment of a divine appointment. Hebron comes from the root chabar, meaning to join, to bind together, to exist in deep covenant fellowship with another. The word chavar, a beloved companion and friend, is built from the same root. Hebron is the city of joining, the city of covenant companionship, the city of binding together what the forces of the world tend to separate. And the theological paradox is breathtaking in its depth. At the city of joining, Abraham faces the ultimate separation. At the city of companionship, the companion of 100 years is taken from him in death. But the paradox is the theology. Burial in Hebron, burial at the place of joining, is itself the deepest act of joining available to a mortal human being. It is the body of Sarah being permanently bound into the soil of the covenant promise. Death becomes a form of belonging. She is joined to the land. She is joined to the promise. She is joined to the unbroken chain of covenant dead who will one day rise together in the fullness of the resurrection. What marked Sarah? The stark, honest, unembellished declaration. The Hebrew text of verse 2 opens with a statement of complete and unadorned honesty. What marked Sarah? And Sarah died. The verb comes from the root mat, to die, to experience mortality in its full and unqualified weight. There is no softening here. No poetic euphemism deployed to ease the impact. No religious language constructed to cushion the blow and make death feel smaller than it is. The Masoretic cantillation places an accent called the Zakef Katong above this phrase, creating a short but liturgically significant pause in the synagogue reading. A catch in the throat of the reader. A moment in which the assembled worshippers cannot simply read past the word of death but must stop and absorb it before continuing. And then the Torah moves forward. Because the Torah does not aestheticize death or make it more comfortable than it is. Only when we face death with its full honest weight can we receive the promise of resurrection with its full honest hope. The Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation completed in Alexandria roughly 2.5 centuries before Christ, renders the location of Sarah's death with the Greek word koiloma, meaning a hollow, a vale, a low-lying place. Sarah was laid in the low places to be, in the fullness of the covenant promise, exalted in the high places. Gregory of Nyssa, the 4th century Cappadocian theologian whose Life of Moses remains one of the greatest explorations of the interior journey with God in all of Christian literature, reads this word as a contemplative invitation of the highest order. The cave is below. The promise is above. And the soul that descends honestly and completely into the hollow of grief, without bypassing it or numbing it or managing it from a safe administrative distance, is the soul being prepared by that very descent for the ascent into the fullness of God's promise. The lowest point of honest grief is never the final point of the covenant story. It is the turning point. Why woe Abraham? He came. He did not send. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Why woe Abraham lispod lisera vilivkota? 3 verbs in a single sentence that contain an entire theology of covenant love. Why woe? He came. Lispod, to mourn. Livkota, to weep for her. And the first verb, why woe? He came, demands the longest and most careful attention. Abraham was in Beersheba, approximately 25 miles to the south of Hebron. When news of Sarah's death reached him, he did not delegate the mourning to servants or household representatives. He did not manage the situation from the safe administrative distance of patriarchal authority. He did not send a message of condolence or a representative to make the necessary funeral arrangements. He made the journey himself. He showed up at the place of death. In the ancient Near Eastern world where men of enormous social standing directed the affairs of extended households from positions of patriarchal command, this personal arrival at the deathbed was an unmistakable and public statement of love that every member of the surrounding community would have recognized immediately for what it was. Love does not delegate. Love comes. The second verb, lispod, to mourn, derives from the root suffered, which in the ancient world referred specifically to the physical act of beating the breast. This is not a metaphor deployed by an ancient text to describe an internal emotional state in poetic language. This is actual, somatic, fully embodied grief expressed with the whole body in the full open air of the community. The ancient world did not mourn quietly and privately behind closed doors. People tore their garments at the moment of receiving the news of death. They poured dust on their heads. They sat on the bare earth rather than on furniture or cushions. They wailed aloud with voices that could be heard throughout the settlement. They struck their chests with their hands in rhythmic, repeated gestures of physical lamentation. And Abraham, the patriarch of nations, the man who had stood on the summit of Moriah and passed the supreme test of covenant faith, came to Hebron and beat his chest in grief over his wife. Faith did not protect him from the full weight of his loss. Faith gave him the freedom to feel that loss completely, without shame, without the need to demonstrate to the community that he was spiritually above the pain of losing his beloved. The small calf. 3,000 years of preserved tenderness. We arrive now at one of the most remarkable features in this entire chapter, preserved in the Masoretic scribal tradition with extraordinary fidelity across 3,000 years of hand copying, and almost never discussed in popular biblical preaching or teaching. In the Torah scroll, the letter kaf in the word livkota, to weep for her, is written as a small letter, a diminutive kaf noticeably smaller than every surrounding letter of the text. This is not a scribal error that survived through careless copying. It is a theologically intentional anomaly, maintained through every single generation of scribal transmission precisely because the community of interpreters understood in every generation that it carries a word too precious and too pastorally important to lose. The Baal Shem Tov, the 18th century founder of Hasidic Judaism whose teachings transformed the landscape of Jewish mystical practice and whose influence extended across the entire subsequent history of Jewish spirituality, reads this small kaf as a sign that Abraham's weeping was restrained in its outward expression not because his grief was small or his love insufficient, but because his deep faith in the resurrection of the dead moderated the visible expression of his sorrow in the public space of the community. He wept. But the visible tears at the gate of Hebron were a small fraction of the vast ocean of grief that moved within him. The small cup is the letter of the hidden tears. The letter of grief too vast, too dense, too personal for full expression in the public forum of the world. And this is a word for every person who has ever been required to hold themselves together in public while privately breaking apart. Every parent who maintained composure at the graveside for the sake of the children. Every leader who carried the weight of private loss into the next morning's responsibilities because the public role left no space for collapse. Every person who wept only in the small hours of the night when the world was not watching. John Chrysostom, the 4th century Archbishop of Constantinople, notes in his pastoral reflection on this text that the visible restraint of Abraham's tears does not diminish the honor of his grief. It deepens it. It shows a man whose love is so vast that it cannot be contained in the public space available for its expression. The small cup is the overflow of love that spills past the boundaries of what public life can hold and is known, in its fullness, only to the God who sees what the small letter cannot fully represent. Your hidden sorrow is not hidden from Him. The God who preserved the small cup in the Torah scroll across 3,000 years of scribal transmission did so because He wanted you, in this specific moment of your life, to know He sees the full ocean of which your small visible expression only partially reveals. He holds every unexpressed tear. He counts every restrained mourning. He honors every grief that was too large for the space available to it. The healing word. Your hidden tears are seen. Grief does not have to be performed in full public view to be real and to be held by God. The tears you restrained for the sake of others, the grief you carried quietly because the space for its expression was not available, the losses you managed from the outside while drowning on the inside, none of it has been invisible to the God who preserved the small cup across 3 millennia. He sees the full measure of what the diminished letter represents. He is not measuring your faith by the volume of your visible mourning. He is honoring the covenant love behind the restraint. You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to feel the full weight of what you have lost. You are allowed to beat your chest with the full somatic, embodied, unashamed grief that Lispod represents. And you are equally allowed, when the public space does not accommodate the full depth of your sorrow, to trust that the small cup is enough. That the portion of grief expressible in the limited space available was received by a God who already holds the complete account. Come to the face of your dead. Sit there without rushing. Feel the full weight. And trust that every tear, visible and invisible, restrained and released, is held in the permanent record of a love that never loses count and never loses a name. Share this with someone carrying grief in silence who needs to know that God sees what the world cannot. Subscribe to continue this verse-by-verse journey. Like this video. And write to us at christ4life143@gmail.com. We read every message and pray over every name. Stay tuned for the next video. Join us next time as we continue verse by verse.